Okay, welcome to the new podcast, Words That Kill, and where I sit down with the writer and we talk about how to kill off our characters. Isn't that fun? Okay, and today my guest is Elaine Pascale, who's a fellow lady of horror, and likes to write dark and gruesome stuff like I do. So she's here to talk about, like I said, killing our characters, and I'll let her introduce herself. So take it away.
Hi, I'm Elaine Pascale. As Anita said, I love to write gruesome horror. Maybe not so much gruesome, but horror. You can find out more about me on my website, ElainePascale.com, and social media is a good place to touch base.
Okay, and yes, I do recommend reading her stuff. She, like I do, she writes the short fiction over on Spreading the Writer's Word every month, and her stories are always enjoyable. So
thank you.
So we're here to talk specifically writing creatures and killing our characters with these creatures. So we'll start first with how do you craft a killer, murderous, monstrous creature? What are your inspirations?
Well, I like unique monsters, as most writers do, and as most audiences do. You know, you get tired of seeing the same monsters over and over again. I used to teach, this is cheating actually, I used to teach a research class at the university level, teaching students how to do research for lengthy research projects. And I taught mine with the theme of monsters because I felt like it's a more relaxed atmosphere. People get really nervous about, you know, oh my God, I got to write a 60-page research paper. I have to do this big research project. I have to do my capstone or whatever it is. So we use the lens of the monster, and students could approach it from, you know, they could look at the economics of tourism and monsters. They could look at the biology of monsters, whatever they wanted to do. But one assignment I had every term was for them to talk about a monster from their culture, because I had many international students. And they would talk about a monster from their culture in the context of how does that monster represent the values of the culture and the beliefs of the culture. So I picked up a lot of interesting monsters. You know, I would see some of the same ones, but every once in a while I'd be like, ooh, okay, that's a good one. I like that monster. So that, and basically that's how I do all my research writing. It's really surprising. I know sometimes it feels awkward to talk to people on the street about monsters and ghosts and scary things, but it's amazing what people will tell you. If you say like, well, what monsters are scary to you? And they'll come out with these really interesting things that can spark your imagination.
Okay, so what's your favorite monster or creature?
Well, if we consider vampires monsters or creatures, I've always been a vampire fanatic, especially with vampire films. And I do like to do research on vampires across the globe, because like Malaysian vampires are very different from the Western European vampire. That said, I'm a purist for the mythology. Like I hated Twilight. You know, I want my vampires to be vampires. Yeah. But I've always been a sucker for creature features. I love, you know, any kind of monster film. Like The Ritual that came out like 2 or 3 years ago was amazing. I just watched one called Sweetheart, which had a like sort of an aquatic creature that was really interesting. You know, I love the shark movies and alligator movies and giant spider movies. So I've always been a fan of the creature feature.
Okay, so how do you go about crafting the death scenes with these creatures? I mean, is there specific things that you need to consider when you're doing creatures? Because I know when I was writing a death scene for sort of a Lovecraftian creature, I had to make it very slimy and creepy and slithery. So what are some of the specifics you use when crafting a death scene?
Well, I don't like to kill the creature. Because
not at all.
I don't like the creature more than anybody else, so I always want the creature to live. And there are those sort of, you know, you get in those sticky spots where like, well, should a creature kill a kid? You know, is that okay? Is that, you know? And as I said, I don't think I'm a gory writer. I tend to be of a school of thought of giving the reader enough that they can fill in the blanks with their imagination, because that's that's scarier. I mean, you think about, and I know I keep going back, we're talking about writing, I keep talking about films, but just for a concrete example, when you think about Jaws, it was so scary because you didn't see the shark for so much of the film. He was beneath the water, and that's what makes it really scary. Like, what does it look like? What does it do? And so more of like people finding, I guess, the remains that the creature leaves behind is always like my scarier tactic, you know, in finding that body and being like, well, what on earth would do this to make this body look like this afterwards? You know, that's more where I sort of come from with the death scenes by the creature, just, you know, I guess the autopsy of the people or something.
Yes. So you're more for the implied violence than the actual, like, write it and splatter the blood over the walls.
I believe so, but you do have to include that at some point, but you sort of build up to it. That's sort of the, you know, sort of the climax, I guess, where you do get some sort of, you have to at some point see it.
Okay, so what is the most gruesome death you've ever written?
That I've ever written. Well, a lot. You know, the funny thing is, I just sold a story about children being killed in their classroom, not like by a shooter, by a teacher, and it's sort of supernatural and whatever. It was not like a school shooting. And I got so many sort of like, oh, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you had these kids dying. And people found that sort of gruesome, and I was really surprised because I didn't find it gruesome at all. I'm trying to think of like a creature one. I guess I've done like, I've made a lot of money off zombies, even though I'm not a big zombie fan. And those are very gruesome from both ends. The zombie attacking the person and eating them, that's very gruesome. Eating off somebody's face, you know, ripping out their throat with your teeth. But then the vice versa of, we always kill zombies in the most gruesome way possible. We cut off their heads, we bash in their heads with bats, we, you know, drill things in. It's all about getting that brain, right? And what kind of gruesome way can you get that brain? So I think the zombie deaths from both ends, both the zombies killing people and the people killing zombies, has probably been the most gruesome of my writing.
Yeah, I'm not much of a zombie writer, actually. I mean, I have nothing against zombies. That's just something that I don't generally write. But you said you're not necessarily a fan, but you've written a lot of zombie stories. So how did that come about?
Interestingly enough, well, some of it was, you know, just sort of like people saying, oh, I've got an anthology coming out and I want zombies. Do you have anything? And I would try to craft something for them. But one of my stories, The Bloodlights, and then I had a couple other zombie stories sort of similar, came from an interest with women and food. And our cultural idea is that women should be dainty and not show their hunger. And by hunger, I mean women are supposed to hide their hunger for power and food and sex and all kinds of urges and be very demure. And so I was really interested in women being overcome with this desire to eat and rip people apart and whatever. And I wrote a zombie story that took place in Roanoke. And that was what happened in Roanoke. So the women got caught up in a Native American curse because they were corresponding with Native Americans and ended up ripping everybody apart. And The Bloodlights is a similar thing, but very focused on this idea of women and violence and women and hunger.
Well, that's actually interesting. That's a cool take on the zombies and stuff, which I find zombies interesting, especially for this particular, you know, killing characters, because zombies are actually, you have to kill the zombie.
Mm-hmm.
And then the zombie kills. So that's kind of an interesting, it's the same with the vampires as well. You basically, if you're going to kill the villain vampire, you're killing him twice. So how do you approach that?
Yeah, I guess I don't really see it as killing. I'm trying to think if I've ever killed a vampire. I haven't. I have 2 vampire stories and the vampires live, so I haven't killed vampires. Other people around them die and they don't.
Yeah. So when you're writing the vampires, do you write about the first death? Because I mean, if you're doing traditional vampire, so they come into it already dead.
One story I did write about, I want to say the traditional death, but again, it was more of a sort of like, I don't want to say witchcraft. It was more of like a pack with the devil kind of thing that turned the person into a vampire. It wasn't so much that they died and became a vampire. They were still undead and needed to feast on blood. But so I
Okay.
didn't kill them initially either. I should talk to a therapist about that.
Hey, I like vampires. I don't kill my vampires off either. My vampires do the killing. So when you're choosing your victim, how do you go about choosing your victim? Are they the vulnerable characters, or do you like to use unexpected deaths?
Both and all the above. I mean, we all love when the character who deserves it gets it, right? There's always like that one character you're like, oh God, I hope they get it, and that's always fun to write too, because you can base them off people that you kind of wish would bite it at some point. And then it's sometimes you do have. I mean, I've had main characters die in stories, and that's a little iffy to do too, because people sometimes. Hopefully they're sympathetic to the main character. Hopefully they're rooting for them, and then to have it not be a happy ending.
Yeah. I killed off a main character once in a story, and people actually enjoyed the story in the collection. I got the most comments about that story.
They liked it the most?
Yeah, which I found odd because it was the story I didn't like the most.
That always happens to me. The stories, it's even like you were saying about when we do the spreading the writer's word, the months that I go, oh, okay, I'm just going to send it, are the months that I get the most positive feedback. And the months where I think, hey, I like this story, I don't get a lot of feedback. So.
Yeah, it's always the stories I like nobody ever comments on.
Exactly. I need to figure this all out at some point, how to make it work better.
I've given up on that. It's just here are the stories, like what you want, Yeah, because I wrote a story about a djinn in my last story collection, Visions and Nightmares, and everybody loved it. But that is the story I had the least like on, because it was so hard to write. It's not that it was a bad story, but because it started out as something else, and I had to turn it around to make it work, and it was really a pain to write. We all have those stories, yeah, but everybody loved it in the end, so. That's the one I got the most comments about in that collection. So I'm glad they liked it in the end.
Yeah.
The suffering was worth it.
As we say, it might make you like it at some point. You might go back and look at it again and think, oh, yeah, I actually do like this.
Okay, so continuing on with the victims and killing off our characters. As a female writer, how do you handle killing off female characters as victims?
I often don't. The women kill the men more often than not. You have to be a little careful about that. You can't, I consider myself a feminist horror writer, even though I didn't intend for that to happen. I think a lot of my horror is based on the vulnerability of being a woman and the fear of walking this world as a woman. I mean, men don't understand how scary it is to walk through an empty parking lot. They don't understand how scary it is to be alone in an elevator and suddenly a man pushes his way into the elevator with you. And so I base a lot of things on those feelings, but with the women coming out ahead or getting, fighting back.
So your body count is more male than female?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I would have to say yes. My husband always asks me about that. He's like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Do you worry about the opposite end of the spectrum, that maybe you're being a little too overly vicious to the males?
Absolutely. And I try to vary it up and try to be very careful of that. And, as I'm starting a story, ask myself, is this really where the story needs to go? I mean, is this a really important part of the story? Or am I just doing that? You don't want to just fall into something. It needs to be a part of the story.
Yeah, because with my last, like I said, my Visions and Nightmares collections, all the main characters in there are women. So they're not victims, they're either trying to overcome something, or they're villains, or for the most part, or they're out for revenge. That's my favorite. So do you do a lot of revenge stories and have your victims and your characters die?
I think I might. I also think I must have a soft spot for final girls too. I think I've always kind of liked that idea that not necessarily like the innocent virginal girl, but maybe the girl who you don't expect to be the one at the end still standing is always an interesting turnabout. So yeah, I mean, and I think there probably is some revenge stuff going on. I don't want to say it's autobiography, things like I'm mad at somebody, so it comes out that way. But because when you think about why people hurt and why people commit violence in a realistic world, they say, you're violent against people you're violent against people you love. It's, it does tend to be like revenge or that intense rage that you can only have for someone you care about.
Okay, so when you're writing monsters versus writing human killers, what's the difference there for you?
I don't think I get into the mind of the monster so much. I'm not one of those like, well, the shark was pregnant and that's why she killed people, or the dog was rabid. I don't get so much into the background of the monster. It's a monster, and so it kills because it's a monster. Whereas the humans, I think I try to provide some sort of context for their behavior and what they do.
So it's more of a psychological motivation with the humans and more of a nature, acting out their nature with the monsters for you.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that man versus nature kind of scenario. I think it's one. I mean, it's been in stories since the dawn of time, and I think it's one that really resonates with people. We have, it's a reminder that we're not in control. Nature will come along and knock us out, even though we think we're in control or we think we have control. I mean, we look at the fires in California now and the floods and obviously the pandemic. Just when we think we've got it all together, Mother Nature comes along and says, no, remember who's in charge here. So it's just that those monsters are just nature. That's who they are.
Okay, so when writing about murder and creatures and whatnot, what is the weirdest thing you've ever come across in your research?
In my research? I guess I'll go back to like those Asian vampires, like the vampires from Malaysia and the Philippines. They tend to be females. They don't like bite with their teeth. They'll have like a long proboscis like a mosquito. And when they go to attack at night, when they're ready to attack, they separate their torso from the rest of their body, and their intestines kind of trail out behind. So like you just have this like flying torso with these intestines like flying along with them, trailing like streamers into the night. And I thought, wow, that's a really interesting take on the vampire. It doesn't look anything like Bela Lugosi or what we picture vampires to look like.
Yeah, I think if you saw that coming at you at night, you'd be a little freaked out.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the biggest death count you ever had in a story or a book?
Well, I write a lot of short stories. So in my short stories, it might only be one or two people, a small handful of people, because it's a short story. You don't, and longer things, I guess the biggest, maybe about a dozen.
That's
kind of
not bad.
keep the interest going. Yeah, no, I don't think, I've never written like a war scene or something where you just have people dropping dead.
Although I have killed off an entire village in one of my short stories, so you can get the body count up in a short story.
That's true. You can rack up those bodies that way.
Yeah, and they died horribly too, just in case you were wondering. Okay, and speaking of that, what is the most gruesome death you've ever done for a character?
I had a woman take a potato peeler and stab it in somebody's eye and start from there, and that was a little gruesome. I don't like eyes. Eyes freak me out. So, so to me, that's the most gruesome.
Yeah, that is gruesome. I mean, I think that whenever the web goes in the eye, that's always going to hit a nerve with people.
Yeah, that's just creepy to me.
Yeah, do you have any favorite research sites that you can recommend to people who want to look up bad ways to kill people? I mean, if, in fiction, that just clarify that.
You have to be really careful of your search engine when you're doing this sort of a thing. You don't want people seeing, like, how do I, dismember a body and burn it with acid. Again, I do a lot of cultural research, so that I sort of go through a library search engine for that just to get, like, what's real I'm kind of always interested in like, oh, werewolves in Germany in the 1400s. How are they different from the werewolves today? So I'll go through a library search engine for that. Uncle Google is always a good start. And as I said, just picking the brains of other people, like what is scary to you? And having that, it's you'll talk to someone, they'll say, oh, one time, oh, now I remember I had this nightmare once about this creature, and they describe the creature, and you think, oh, wow, that's really good. That is scary.
Okay, so well, that's our time. So I'd like to thank you for being here today. It was a
Well,
pleasure
thank you for
chatting with
having
you.
me. It was fun.
And if you want to tell everybody where they can find you and your stories and books, then go ahead.
I am ElainePascale.com. It's my full name.com. That's my website. I also have an author site on Amazon and Goodreads. And I'm on Facebook as Elaine Pascale. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram as @DocLaney, DocLaney.
And you'll be able to find all those lovely links in the description. So be sure to check out her stories. And thank you for joining us for this first episode of Words That Kill. And we will be back again with another author and more bodies. So join us then.